More than 100,000 Russian soldiers may have been taken out of the fight by a Ukrainian force that was organized less than 1 year ago. That is the number Ukraine is putting forward, and it is impossible to ignore. But the real shock is not only the number. It is how Ukraine says this happened. Drones are no longer being used only as small flying weapons. Ukraine is turning them into a full battlefield system, where scouts, data, target marking, and strikes are connected in one fast network. Russia entered the spring campaign hoping to increase pressure in Donbass and force Ukraine backward. But by mid-2026, the battlefield looked far more difficult for Moscow. Russian attacks were still heavy, but they did not create the major breakthrough the Kremlin wanted. At the same time, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, also known as USF or SBS, became a tool to slow, blind, and wear down Russian forces from the front line to the rear. According to Commander Robert Brovdy, this force carried out about 1.65 million combat missions, launched around 350,000 strikes, and caused more than 100,000 Russian casualties. If these figures are close to reality, then this war is not only about tanks, artillery, or missiles. It is about who can find the target first, move data faster, and strike before the enemy can react. Before we go deeper, subscribe to Military Force, because this is the kind of battlefield change every modern army is watching. So why did Russia's spring offensive fail to deliver the breakthrough Moscow expected? And how did Ukraine's drone force become one of the most important weapons of this war? Russia's spring campaign did not collapse, but it failed to create the strategic break Moscow needed. That point matters, because failure in war does not always look like a total retreat. Sometimes failure means spending more troops, more shells, more missiles, and more armored vehicles, but still not changing the map in a decisive way. That is the problem Russia appears to be facing. Moscow entered the spring with the goal of increasing pressure across eastern Ukraine, especially around Donbass. The plan was not only to take small villages or push a few tree lines forward. The real aim was to force Ukraine into a wider defensive crisis, stretch Ukrainian brigades, weaken supply routes, and make Kyiv react to Russian pressure instead of setting its own pace. Russia still attacked hard. Its artillery kept firing. Its infantry kept moving. Its armored vehicles still tried to support assaults near key roads, towns, and defensive lines. But the results did not match the size of the effort. This does not mean Russian forces gained nothing. In several areas, they still pushed forward, tested Ukrainian defenses, and forced costly local battles. But the larger picture was different. The spring offensive did not become the kind of breakthrough that would change the direction of the war. For Moscow, that is a serious operational problem. A major offensive is supposed to produce pressure that grows with time. It should open gaps, break coordination, and make the defender move reserves in panic. Instead, the battlefield trend suggests that Russia paid heavily for limited gains, while Ukraine found new ways to slow the assault before it reached full strength. That is where drones became more important. Ukraine did not need one massive counterattack to change the rhythm of the fighting. It could damage the Russian campaign by making each movement more dangerous. A truck carrying ammunition could be spotted before it reached a gun line. A group of infantry could be tracked before it entered a village. A vehicle column could be watched from above, then hit when it slowed down on a road or crossed open ground. This kind of pressure does not always look dramatic on a map, but it can change the cost of every Russian action. If a unit arrives late, the attack weakens. If fuel trucks are destroyed, tanks move less. If artillery positions are hunted after firing, infantry loses cover. If commanders must hide, move, and communicate under constant drone threat, the whole campaign becomes harder to control. This is why Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, also known as USF or SBS, became a symbol of the shift. Drones were already part of the war long before this force was organized. But the important change is structure. Ukraine moved from scattered drone activity toward a more coordinated battlefield network. Reconnaissance, target selection, strike teams, and command decisions began to work as parts of one system. That matters because Russia's advantage has often been mass. More artillery, more troops, more pressure along the line. But mass becomes less useful when it is seen early, tracked continuously, and struck before it can concentrate. Ukraine's goal was not simply to destroy one tank or one gun. The deeper aim was to make Russian combat power arrive at the front weaker than when it left the rear. This is why the spring campaign should be judged carefully. Russia was not defeated in one clean moment. Ukraine did not suddenly control every part of the battlefield. But the pattern shows that Moscow struggled to turn firepower into a clear strategic result, while Ukrainian drones helped turn Russian movement into exposure. And to understand why that exposure became so costly, we have to look at the numbers reported by the commander of Ukraine's drone force. The numbers reported by Robert Brovdy show that Ukraine's drone war has moved into battlefield industrial scale. According to figures released by Ukraine, the Unmanned Systems Forces, also known as USF or SBS, caused 100,082 Russian casualties in less than 1 year. That total included 53,477 killed and 46,605 wounded. These are Ukrainian figures, so they should be treated with caution. But even with that warning, the scale is difficult to ignore. Brovdy's numbers suggest that drones are no longer a side weapon used only when artillery is not available. They have become a major arm of combat power. The same force reported about 1.65 million combat missions. That means close to 5,000 sorties every day. It also claimed more than 350,000 strikes or disabled targets. For any army, that tempo is a serious problem. A single drone attack can be repaired around. A few hundred strikes can be absorbed over time. But thousands of missions every day create a different kind of pressure. They force commanders to move more carefully. They make supply officers change routes. They push artillery crews to hide after firing. They make drivers fear open roads, tree lines, bridges, and even short supply runs. That is why the equipment losses matter as much as the human losses. Ukraine says this drone force hit 248 Russian air defense systems, 817 tanks, and 1,379 armored vehicles. It also reported 4,890 artillery systems, 342 self-propelled guns, and 281 multiple launch rocket systems destroyed or disabled. The list continued with 26,430 logistics vehicles, plus many Russian reconnaissance drones and launch positions. Those categories tell a larger story. Air defense vehicles protect the rear. Tanks support assaults. Armored carriers move infantry. Artillery gives Russian troops the fire cover they often depend on. Rocket systems strike deeper targets. Logistics vehicles keep the whole machine alive. When all of these are being hunted at the same time, the damage is not limited to one sector. It spreads across the way Russia tries to fight. This is the key point for an American viewer watching the war from far away. The lesson is not simply that cheap drones can destroy expensive machines. That is true, but it is only the first layer. The deeper lesson is that a modern army can be weakened by constant observation and constant attack across many small points. A tank does not need to be destroyed at the front to lose value. It can lose value if the fuel truck behind it is burned. A gun does not need to be captured to stop firing. It can become useless if its crew must keep moving because drones are waiting above. A battalion does not need to be surrounded to lose momentum. It can be slowed by damaged roads, broken vehicles, missing supplies, and fear of being seen. This is why Ukraine's drone campaign is being watched by NATO armies. For decades, Western military planning focused on larger aircraft, heavier armor, better missiles, and stronger command networks. Those tools still matter. But Ukraine is showing that small unmanned systems, when used in huge numbers and linked to good data, can change the balance of a battle. The question is no longer only who has the biggest weapon. It is who can find the target first, send the information fastest, and strike before the enemy can adjust. Brovdy's figures are important because they show rhythm, not just destruction. They describe a force that can keep pressure on Russian units every day, across the front and behind it. But these numbers only make sense when we look at how Ukraine turned separate drone teams into one coordinated system of war. Ukraine's real drone advantage is not only the number of aircraft in the sky, but the way those aircraft are organized into a battlefield system. That is the difference between a weapon and a method of war. Early in the conflict, many Ukrainian drone teams worked with great skill, but often in a more local way. One unit could spot a Russian vehicle, another could drop a small bomb. A different team could guide artillery fire or send an FPV drone into a target. These actions were dangerous for Russia, but they were not always tied into one larger process. Over time, Ukraine began to change that model. The creation and growth of the unmanned systems forces helped turn many separate efforts into a more coordinated chain of action. A reconnaissance drone could search a road, a tree line, or a suspected firing point. The information could then move into a command network where the target was checked, ranked, and matched with the right weapon. If the target was close, an FPV drone could be used. If it was deeper, a medium-range drone or artillery unit might be chosen. If it was valuable enough, the information could support a wider strike plan. This is why the system matters. A drone by itself is limited. It needs an operator. It needs a signal. It needs a battery, a warhead, a map, and a safe launch point. It also needs a commander who knows whether the target is worth the risk. Without that structure, even a good drone can become only a short moment of damage. With coordination, the same aircraft becomes part of a larger machine. This machine is built around the kill chain. That phrase sounds technical, but the idea is simple. Find the target, confirm what it is, send the location, choose the weapon, strike before the target escapes. The faster that chain works, the less time Russia has to react. That is where Ukraine has been improving. A Russian fuel truck is no longer just a truck moving down a road. If it is seen, it can be followed. If it is followed, its route can be studied. If its route is understood, the strike team can wait for the moment when the vehicle slows, turns, stops, or enters open ground. The attack does not have to happen at the first sighting. It can happen when the target becomes easiest to hit. The same logic can apply to artillery crews. A Russian gun may fire and then move away, but a drone network can watch the area, look for tracks, and search for the support vehicles that keep the gun working. That makes survival harder. It is not enough to hide the weapon. The crew must also hide movement, supply, radio use, and repeated habits. This is where drone warfare becomes more than flying cameras and small explosives. It becomes a discipline of observation. It studies behavior. It punishes routine. It turns repeated routes into danger zones. For Russia, that creates a serious command problem. Large forces need roads, depots, fuel points, repair teams, and predictable schedules. But the more predictable a system becomes, the easier it is for drones to map it. Ukraine's shift is important because it attacks that predictability. It forces Russian units to move in smaller groups, change timing, use cover, and spend more effort on concealment. That slows operations even when nothing is destroyed. A delayed convoy can weaken an assault. A hidden artillery crew can fire less often. A commander who fears detection may wait too long to move reserves. This is the real difference between scattered drone attacks and system warfare. Scattered attacks hurt what they hit. A coordinated network changes how the enemy behaves. And once that network expands beyond the front line, The danger no longer stops where the trenches end. Ukraine is trying to turn Russia's tactical rear into an extension of the front line. That is one of the most important shifts in this phase of the war. For a long time, many areas behind Russian lines had a strange kind of safety. They were too deep for most short-range FPV drones, but they were not always important enough for larger long-range weapons. That created a dangerous gap between the front and the deep rear. Ukraine is now trying to close that gap. Recent international reporting says Ukrainian mid-range drones are striking the zone roughly 25 to 200 kilometers behind Russian positions. That area matters because it is where armies breathe. Fuel moves there. Ammunition is stored there. Troops pass through those roads before they reach the trenches. Repair crews, command posts, relay points, and vehicle parks often sit in that space because it is supposed to be safer than the front. But if Ukrainian drones can reach it, then Russia's rear becomes harder to trust. This does not mean every road is closed. It does not mean every depot is burning. The real effect is more subtle, and that is why it can be dangerous. Ukraine does not need to destroy an entire supply route to weaken it. It only needs to make that route slower, more expensive, and harder to plan. If Russian trucks must take longer roads, the same delivery uses more fuel and more time. If convoys must be broken into smaller groups, fewer supplies arrive at once. If vehicles need armed escorts, those escorts are pulled away from other missions. If cargo must be hidden in civilian-style vehicles, loading and movement become more complicated. If more air defense and electronic warfare teams are needed in the rear, Russia has fewer assets to protect other important areas. This is how pressure spreads through a military system. A burned fuel truck is one loss. A supply network that must change its habits every day is a larger problem. Russia appears to understand this. Recent reporting says Moscow has been trying to adjust by camouflaging shipments, using civilian vehicles, splitting convoys, changing routes, and placing more electronic warfare systems near important areas. Some Russian forces are also trying to disrupt Starlink links that help Ukrainian drone crews control aircraft over longer distances. That response shows the pressure is real. Armies do not change supply behavior unless the threat is serious enough to affect movement. For Moscow, the danger is not only the drone that hits a truck. The danger is the fear that any road, stop, warehouse, bridge, or vehicle yard may already be watched. That fear changes decisions. A commander may delay a convoy until night. A driver may avoid a direct route. A supply officer may choose a smaller shipment to reduce the risk. A repair team may move equipment farther back, which makes recovery slower. None of these choices looks dramatic by itself. Together, they reduce tempo. And tempo is vital in a war of attrition. Russia's army needs constant movement to keep pressure on Ukrainian lines. Shells must reach guns. Fuel must reach tanks. Food, water, spare parts, and medical transport must move every day. When those flows become uncertain, the front can still fight, but it fights with less confidence. This is why the expanding kill zone is so important. It blurs the old line between combat area and support area. A place that was once considered behind the battle can now become part of the battle. For Ukraine, that is the purpose. The goal is not only to hit what Russia has already placed at the front. The deeper goal is to make Russian strength arrive late, arrive smaller, or arrive under stress. But to strike deep and strike accurately, Ukraine needs more than aircraft in the sky. It needs faster data, clearer targets, and a command system that can turn information into fire before Russia can move. Drones are only the visible part of Ukraine's new way of war. Behind them is a deeper system built on data, production, training, and political pressure. This is where the battlefield becomes more than a contest between flying machines. A drone can see a road. A satellite can show what changed on that road before the drone arrived. A command system can compare the image, mark the target, and send the information to the unit that can strike it fastest. That is why commercial satellite imagery has become so important for Ukraine. According to reporting on this system, Ukrainian soldiers can receive near real-time satellite pictures on phones, tablets, or laptops. That may sound simple, but on the battlefield, it can change the speed of a fight. If a Russian vehicle park appears in a new location, Ukraine does not have to wait for a long intelligence chain to move through several offices. If a convoy gathers near a known road, the image can help confirm what drones are already seeing. If a depot expands, changes shape, or shows new activity, strike planners can act before the target disappears. Some reports say this method can cut the time needed to process intelligence and attack a target by up to 90%. That is a huge difference. In modern war, speed can matter as much as firepower. A slow army may see the same target, but strike too late. A faster army can turn information into damage while the enemy is still exposed. This is where Ukraine's Delta system also matters. Delta helps connect battlefield information, drone feeds, maps, target reports, and unit decisions into a shared picture. When reconnaissance drones, satellite images, and strike teams work through the same digital structure, Ukraine can reduce the gap between seeing and hitting. That gap is one of the most important spaces in this war. Russia can hide a truck, it can move a gun, it can shift a command post. But if Ukraine shortens the time between detection and attack, hiding becomes harder and movement becomes more dangerous. Production is the other side of this story. A drone war cannot be sustained by tactics alone. Ukraine needs airframes, motors, cameras, batteries, warheads, pilots, repair teams, and electronic parts every day. That is why Kyiv has pushed hard to expand domestic drone manufacturing. Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council has said the country's FPV drone production capacity is above 8 million units per year. Other reporting, citing Ukraine's defense ministry, says Kyiv aims to produce more than 7 million drones in 2026, after producing more than 4 million in 2025. These numbers show a serious ambition. Ukraine is not only trying to survive with foreign supplies, it is trying to build a war industry around unmanned systems. That lesson is now moving beyond Ukraine. When casualties rise, supply lines are hit, and drone strikes reach deeper areas, the war becomes a social burden as well as a military operation. Drone warfare will not end the conflict by itself. But it can change the price Russia must pay to keep fighting. And that price is now shaping the larger story of the war. Ukraine's drone campaign is not just a story about machines in the sky. It is a warning about how modern war is changing. Drones, satellite images, battlefield data, the Delta system, and local strike teams are now being tied together into one faster fighting network. That network does not need to destroy every Russian unit to create pressure. It only needs to make Russian movement slower, supply lines weaker, and command decisions harder. Russia still has a large army. It still has missiles, artillery, air defense, drones, and the ability to adapt. So this war is not close to a simple ending. But the spring campaign showed a serious problem for Moscow. Every advance is becoming more costly, and every road to the front can turn into a target. For Ukraine, the lesson is clear. The side that sees first, shares data faster, and strikes with better timing may control the rhythm of the battle. In the 21st century, firepower still matters, but information may decide how that firepower is used. Subscribe to Military Force because understanding war is one way to understand why peace matters.